This is the only outlet that's covering it. There's no mainstream outlet that's covering it, and I don't even like how this outlet covers it, but this is the only place that talks about it. So Gonzalo Lira is no longer in prison. I would go through his tweet thread. We can just have this in the background for a bit. I would show you guys his tweet thread where he talks about not being in prison. Well, I say he's no longer in prison. Let me clarify. He wasn't in prison, and now he's back in prison. And he put himself back in prison like a moron. The last 24 hours have proven that Gonzalo Lira, hands down, is the dumbest person covering the war in Ukraine. I am confident Gonzalo Lira, aka Coach Red Pill, in my assertion, from all the people I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of people, talked to Yankee Tanky, I've talked to a lot of really off the walls people like Infrared or Jackson Hinkle. Gonzalo Lira is the dumbest. Okay, that's a high bar. But after I describe to you what Gonzalo Lira did in the last 24 to 48 hours after being dropped out of Ukrainian custody, I think it'll be much easier to understand. And some of these aspects might be a little harder to understand because you're not in Ukraine. You don't know how it's like to try to cross the border in Ukraine. As somebody who's done it during wartime, I'll try to explain. But let's talk about what happened. So Gonzalo Lira was dropped from Ukrainian custody. He was dropped from Ukrainian custody. And so the first thing that he decided to do was to release a bunch of statements about how he had been tortured by the Ukrainian government in custody. It was brutal torture. And then he's, now out of captivity, and he's going to make a beeline for the border and claim asylum in Hungary. I believe Elliot Higgins summarized it very well. Gonzalo Lira made the genius decision to announce he was planning to flee Ukraine while on bail. He was on bail in Ukraine. He was on bail for his crimes. So the Ukrainian government, for I think the third time now, have let him go. I think this might be the second or third time they've let him go. I know originally they detained him and they're like, hey, look, you're spreading misinformation about the war. You're denying that Bucha was done by the Russians. You're blaming it on us. You're calling for Ukraine to be bombed. Stop doing it. And he was like, okay, I'll stop. Then they let him go. Then he immediately continues to do it, which then leads to him being arrested for real and then giving real criminal penalties, right? Real criminal penalties. There was like a video of his place getting raided, and then he's let go again. And then immediately he announces on social media that he's going to be fleeing Ukraine, leaving the country to head to Hungary to claim political asylum. Now, I have traveled a lot in Ukraine now after doing war coverage for almost 2 years now, I think. Something I've learned is good OPSEC. Anytime that I travel to a new location, I will never post where I am. Never will I post my exact location. And I'll only sometimes give a vague idea of what I'm doing. Guys, I'm going to be going to the Kharkiv Oblast, the Kharkiv region, and filming. Okay, that's a big area. Okay, that's, there's not really much you can do with that. But what's important is that I restrict the information. Remember when I was in Mykolaiv and we were getting shelled, I didn't immediately go to Twitter and go like, OMG, I'm getting shelled. I didn't do that because I didn't want to post anything online that could endanger me, the people around me, or anyone else. And so it was only later, much later, once I had gotten to a safe location, that I tweeted about what happened. And I messaged about what happened and talked about the bombing that happened in Mykolaiv, the targeting of civilians. I don't know why Gonzalo Lira wouldn't wait until he is in Hungary to start doing this unless he is that starved for social affirmation. He is that starved for people to clap for him and tell him he's right after a few months in a Ukrainian prison. That the first thing he did wasn't to flee the country and pursue his safety, which if everything he's saying about Ukraine is true, first thing I'm going to do is either hole up in an apartment and stay hidden so nobody can see me. Nobody knows where I am and I can be left alone until the trial, or flee in secret. But no, he had to flee while pressing on a foghorn, an air horn, garnering as much attention as physically possible. Very, very stupid. By the way, I know what it's like to cross the border in Ukraine. It's pretty serious, man. They don't take it lightly. I'm not saying that they're like giving you cavity searches or anything. I don't think it's necessarily impossible to like get by them, you know, or get something by them. But lying about your identity to trying to cross the border is going to be an extremely difficult thing to do. And we don't even know if he did that. There's a scenario where Gonzalo Lira went to the border of Hungary, then said, hey, here's my passport, here's my ID, let me out. They then looked him up, saw I was on bail, and immediately went like, no, you moron. And in fact, I think there's a really likely scenario where that's what happened. And of course that's what would happen. It's not like he can just run across the border. Ukraine's a nation at war. Their border guards have machine guns. When you cross the border, their guards are armed, man. He wasn't going to be able to make a beeline for it, so he was going to have to go through with proper paperwork, or at least some type of forged paperwork that can get him through, but it didn't work. Finally gets out on bail, finally releases a public statement, says a really tall tale, which we're going to talk about in a moment, and then gets arrested again while trying to flee the country, while announcing he's going to flee the country. Could you imagine if every time that that Harriet Tubman did like a slave, like tried to free a slave, tried to bring a slave out of captivity, she was like, okay, about to go through the Georgian highway with this guy called Jeremy. We're gonna try to make it over the border into Canada in the next few hours. And just sending those messages out on carrier pigeon to major news stations. No, that'd be stupid. That'd be really stupid. Anyway, let's continue. Wait, Neptune just said, I've literally slept on average about 3 hours in the last 3 days, and I fully blame you, Dylan. How dare you show me Hearts of Iron was so fun. Sorry, got you trapped. Let's listen to what he has to say, though, because Gonzalo Lira didn't just immediately get his ass rearrested. He also spun a yarn, a tale, scratched my left eye with a toothpick, cracked rib, U.S. Chilean journalist. This is a lie, okay? Journalism is not when you're in your room and you just blog about what other people are doing. Journalism is when you go out and you interview people and you cover stories and do journalism. He was a pro-Russian, pro-war blogger. Okay, but whatever. Describes torture in Ukrainian prison. Reportedly, one of the individuals involved in the torture of the 55-year-old blogger, see, that's a better descriptor, was supposedly rebuked for causing bruises on the blogger's chest, as the instructions had been to avoid leaving any visible marks. Okay, let's read. Chilean-American blogger Gonzalo Lira, who was detained by Ukrainian intelligence in May due to allegations of having pro-Russian sympathies, resurfaced on the internet on Monday. And by the way, it's not allegations of having pro-Russian sympathies. He actively endorses the bombing of Ukraine. He is in Ukraine, the nation being invaded, cheering on the invasion, cheering on the bombing, and trying to cover up the war crime. So it's not pro-Russian sympathies. He is pro-Russian. He is pro-invasion. He is pro-war. Resurfaced on, he even has drawn up fantasy plans for how he wants to cut up Ukraine, give some of its land to Hungary, give some of its land to Poland, give some of its land to Russia. It's insane. Resurfaced on the internet Monday and recounted a distressing tale of physical assaults and blackmail while awaiting a show trial. A show trial assumes that he didn't commit the crime, but we've seen him publicly endorse the bombing of Ukraine enough to know that he did commit the crime. It's not a show trial if he did commit the crime. I was tortured in 2 of 4 cells I was in by the other prisoners, Lira posted in a 25-tweet thread on Monday evening. I got a cracked rib in my first cell, but it wasn't too bad. The worst stretch was in my 4th cell. From 1 p.m. on June 21st until 7 p.m. the next day, 30 hours, 2 inmates tortured him at one point, used a toothpick to scratch the whites of my left eye while asking me if I could still read if I had just one, Lira wrote. Reportedly, One of the individuals involved in the torture of the 55-year-old blogger was supposedly rebuked for causing bruising on the blogger's chest, as the instructions had been to avoid leaving any visible marks. Lira shared images of the documents detailing the accusations against him, indicating that his imprisonment was the result of his social media posts and YouTube videos. He pointed out that one particular video titled Ukraine a Primer, which he provided an analysis of the conflict with Russia and attributed the provocation to Kiev, had caught the attention of the authorities. Okay, so what here is backed by anything outside of just his word? Everything he says here about him being tortured and beaten and scratching his eyeballs with toothpicks, all of this is just off of what Gonzalo Lira himself has said. That's the only evidence we had. And 42,000 people ate it up. Just his word and his word alone. Even though Gonzalo Lira doesn't just have a history of exaggerating, he has a history of outright lying. He's lied about American HIMARS being destroyed by the Russian military. He's lied about Bucha. He's lied about every aspect of this war, to be quite frank with you. And considering Gonzalo Lira's record on lying and how we see how he engages dishonestly with other people like Laserpig and Destiny, it makes me think that not that it's impossible that this happened, but that I'm going to need a lot more than just the word of a known liar to make me believe that they tortured him with toothpicks. So no, I'm not going to accept his word on face value like many, many other people, including First Post, have done here. Look, if he didn't have a history of lying, maybe I would take the accusation a lot more seriously, as one usually should for these types of situations. But we're talking about Gonzalo Lira here. According to Lira, he was beaten and tortured because the security services of Ukraine wanted to extort his entire savings, which amounted to approximately $100,000 when considering the value of confiscated computers and phones. And how many computers does he have? Upon being informed that $100,000 in computers and phones alone? That's a lot. Upon being informed that he would be declared guilty and face a sentence of 5 to 8 years in a labor camp during his imminent trial, Lira made the decision to leave Ukraine and pursue asylum in Hungary. I'm posing this thread as I'm getting to the border checkpoint, he tweeted. If you don't hear me for the next 12 hours, welp, I'm on my way to a labor camp. Wish me luck. Well, we haven't heard from him in well over 24 hours, so I guess he's going to a Ukrainian gulag, a Ukrainian labor camp with Stefan Bandera himself is manning the whips. What does he mean by a labor camp? Does anybody know what he could be referring to when he says labor camp? Did any prosecutor give him time, like an idea that, you know, once he's been found guilty, we're gonna send him to, like, trenches, and they're gonna dig up trenches and engage in hard labor? Like, when he says labor camp, are we talking about like how we think of like gulags in popular culture? Or are we talking about how like American private prisons work? We're talking about how like people work in prisons. Either way, who knows? Lira acknowledged that the Chilean embassy for any assistance he received while in detention, highlighting that the U.S. embassy reached out to him 3 times, but only offered support without any substantial help. He also expressed concerns that the U.S. might extradite him back to Ukraine due to his belief that acting Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland holds animosity towards him, as he has been told. Oh, wow. That's a really good source. Oh my goodness, I might be deported because very powerful politicians hate me specifically. What's my source on this? I was told by somebody. No, I can't really provide any evidence, but I was told by somebody that I'm very important. On May 1st, Lira was apprehended by the SBU, who accused him of producing and disseminating materials that justified the armed invasion against Russia. Man. I don't buy a single word of his story until he presents evidence, man. I don't believe a single word of his story. People have been mistreated in detention in this war. Aiden, the detained British expat who fought with the Ukrainian Marines in Mariupol, is a great example of just like somebody be obviously mistreated. You can see where a lot of these prisoners are returned and how skinny they are. Obvious mistreatment. But when I look at Gonzalo Lira, right? And I don't know if we have a video here. I'm not saying that it's impossible. Again, this is the last time I'll say it. I'm not saying it's possible that he was tortured. But we have a dating coach turned geopolitical analyst who is a known liar, super narcissist, by the way, who's now given a moment in the spotlight. And it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that he's taken this moment to exaggerate and to not only exaggerate, but to straight up lie to try to build sympathy for himself. I would not put that past Gonzalo Lira. Anyway, we'll just have to wait and see. Moron got rearrested. If you're going to flee a country, don't tweet about it on Twitter.